President Obama has announced the United States will definitively end the war in Iraq at the end of this month. But as the United States attempts to get the military personnel and contractors out of the country, questions still remain about the implications of this decision for security in the region. Joining me to help discuss this is the former Indian ambassador to Iraq and the author of the book, The Ultimate Prize, Ranjit Singh Kalla. Thanks so much for joining me. First of all, I want to ask you about the recent terrorist attacks in Iraq. Obviously, there have been quite a few in the past few years, and they've claimed hundreds of Iraqi citizens' lives. Do you think there's still a role for the United States in Iraq?
When the Americans walked in, they could not have done anything but to introduce some semblance of democracy. Otherwise, what was the reason of going in? And once they went in and they decided to introduce some semblance of democracy, it was going to be a Shiite-led government. And because it was a Shiite-led government, it has very strong links with its co-religious in Iran. And therefore, the main, aim, which I should say was to make sure that the oil, the vast oil wealth of Iraq remains available, would be in jeopardy. And I think that is basically the present dilemma. If you withdraw from Iraq completely, you leave this vast oil wealth of Iraq in the hands of a Shiite-led government, which is very close links with Iran, and therefore it upsets the political balance as far as the Middle East is concerned. So to that extent, to counter this, the Americans have now thought of withdrawing their troops, but at the same time strengthening their position in Iraq. Now the US embassy in Iraq is going to be about almost 20,000 strong. It's going to have numerous sub-offices like training of troops, etc., who will be basically Americans who would be basically military men, but working for the US embassy. Similarly, there will be a consulate in Basra, there will be a consulate in Kirkuk, there will be a consulate even further north. And each one of these consulates is about 1,000 strong. It will perhaps be the largest US embassy anywhere in the world. I mean, normal embassies are usually between 30 to 40, maybe if it's a very big embassy, perhaps 100 strong. But 20,000 strong, it means that there are going to be lots of other people who are going to be still in Iraq. Now, the reason why I say this is that they cannot afford to be completely absent from Iraq. And therefore, while agreeing to withdraw troops as per the agreement, they are in a way coming back wearing civilian clothes. And in fact, I don't see any lessening of American influence as far as Iraq is concerned.
And you sort of just spoke about these sectarian issues within Iraq. When and if the United States technically leaves the country, how do you think the Iraqi government will be able to stop these sectarian divisions into becoming a full-fledged civil war?
It's going to be extremely difficult, because if you see the communities of Iraq as they existed, most of the military in pre-US invasion Iraq was Sunni dominated. Most of the officers were Sunni. The Shiites were basically foot soldiers. They had no basic military training as such. And therefore, because it was a Sunni-led government, they were able to keep them in check. It was basically by a force of arms that people were kept, in check. And of course, the strong arm methods of every ruler who has been there, whether it was Saddam or even earlier, most of them were using very tough methods to keep, the population in check. Now, whether the new government, which is the Shiite-led government, will be able to equally take strong arm measures to control the situation is a bit doubtful, because frankly, I don't think they have the experience to be able to run a country like Iraq. And therefore, they're going to be, I foresee, sectarian violence perhaps may not be of the scale that it is now, but perhaps even a little more than what is presently going on.
And you mentioned the United States troops going to Kuwait. How do you think the Arab Gulf countries are going to react to that? Are they going to welcome the Americans?
I don't think so, because I don't see this withdrawal taking place. Actually, I think it's just a reshuffle of the cards, so as to speak, because the Americans are not going very far. They're just going to Kuwait, which is next door, and you can always come back because the bases will be kept intact. And as I mentioned, with a 20,000 strong US embassy, most of their staff, etc., will always be there. And secondly, they have made sure that there is no Iraqi Air Force. In fact, you find that there's hardly, perhaps not even less than, they don't even have 5 planes to fly around. So they don't control the airspace. The airspace over Iraq will be controlled by the Americans. And which means that you can reinforce at will whenever you want, however you want. And you can also prevent anybody else from coming in, perhaps even if say the Iranians were to decide. The American Air Force would be available to make sure that they don't cross over. So I don't see, I don't consider this as an American withdrawal. I think it's just a reshuffling of the pack.
And what about Iran? Do you think Iran could potentially be ready to fill some sort of void if the United States leaves Iraq?
Well, that is always a possibility, because the Iran-Iraq border is very porous. It's very difficult to what we call police the entire border. It's a very long border, and and in many areas you find, of course, there are mountains. Then there are the plains, and there is a river, the Shatt al-Arab, which is the boundary between Iran and Iraq. And then most of the tribesmen living on the Iranian side are also Arabs, and they are Shiites too. So there is a lot of to and froing going across the border, and there is intermarriage, and there is also a lot of should I say, illicit trade which goes on across the border. So as far as the Iranians wanting to intervene or to create problems in Iraq, that is always a possibility. And don't forget, in the past, it was the Iranians who used to provide arms to the Kurds to create problems for Saddam Hussein. And so it won't be the first time, and probably not the last time either, when they would do so.
Obviously, President Obama also has announced that he's going to pull the troops out of Afghanistan. We're about to enter an election year. How much of pulling out troops from Iraq and Afghanistan do you think is part of for domestic consumption by the Americans? Well,
obviously, he has to meet deadlines which have been set by himself. I mean, the US administration have set the deadlines themselves. And as I mentioned in the case of Iraq, it's basically a reshuffling of the pack. I mean, you give it another name, you change it around, call them what you like. But as far as Afghanistan is concerned, perhaps a similar kind of strategy may be followed, where you may be able to withdraw, US may be able to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, but leave a very strong component behind, perhaps in the form of civilian advisors, military advisors, and training teams, etc., who may not be taking part in combat, what they call role, but they can certainly act as an advisory role to the new Afghan army as and when it develops. But in any case, I think that's a little far away. So let's see, because I don't think it's going to be a decision which is going to be taken so quickly.
And the United States has spent so much money in Iraq, $3 trillion. What do you think the Americans can gain from everything that happened there?
I've always believed that anybody who's lived in Iraq, as I have lived in Iraq, that nobody goes there for tourism. It's in a complete, what should I say, a country which is hot. It's 50 degrees centigrade most of the time.